I thought I knew my family, but sometimes the people you trust the most can turn into strangers in the blink of an eye. The lines between love, loyalty, and betrayal blur in ways you'd never see coming. And the hardest lessons often come from the ones you thought would never hurt you. Growing up, my sister Emily was the center of our family's universe. She was the golden child. Everything she did was celebrated, no matter how small, while my own achievements barely earned a nod. If Emily got in trouble, somehow it was my fault. If Emily wanted something, it was taken from me and handed to her. My parents used to say, "She's younger, she needs more attention." But that excuse carried on long past childhood. By the time we were adults, the pattern was carved in stone. Emily was the star, and I was just the backdrop. I learned to live with it, or at least I thought I did. I built a life outside of my family, away from the suffocating favoritism. I went to college, worked hard, and when I met Michael, my fiancé, it felt like I had finally found someone who truly saw me. He wasn't dazzled by my sister's manipulations or my parents' excuses. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't invisible. But the thing about golden children? They don't give up the spotlight so easily. And Emily, she wasn't about to let me have something she couldn't control. When Michael and I got engaged, I knew I had to introduce him to my family. Honestly, I dreaded it. I told him bits and pieces about how things worked in my house, but words never really capture the atmosphere of living in someone's shadow. Michael, being the optimist he is, said he wanted to meet them anyway. "If they matter to you, they matter to me," he told me. The day we walked into my parents' house, the air already felt heavy. My mom's eyes went straight to Emily, who was lounging on the couch like a queen waiting to be acknowledged. She didn't even look at me when we entered. Her gaze went right to Michael. I could feel the shift instantly. Emily had that calculating sparkle in her eyes. The one I'd seen 100 times before whenever she wanted something that wasn't hers. She stood up too quickly and gave Michael one of her practice smiles. The kind she used to get teachers, friends, even boyfriends to do what she wanted. Michael noticed. He didn't say anything at first, but his hand tightened around mine as if to steady me. My stomach sank, and I realized that this introduction was not going to go the way I had hoped. Dinner started off tense, though my parents pretended everything was normal. My dad asked Michael about his job. My mom fussed over Emily's plate like she was still 12, and I tried to keep the conversation flowing. But Emily, she couldn't resist. She leaned in too close whenever Michael spoke, laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, and brushed her hand against his arm like it was an accident. Michael caught my eye more than once, silently checking if I saw what he saw. I did. My jaw clenched tighter with every move she made. Finally, when she leaned across the table, again, Michael pulled back and said firmly, "Emily, could you not? That's not appropriate." The table went silent. My mom froze, fork midair. My dad frowned. And Emily? She sat back with a look of pure shock, like she'd just been insulted in the worst possible way. Then her expression shifted, sweet, fake, wounded. "Wow," she said softly, putting a hand to her chest. "So that's your game? You've been flirting with me all night, and now you're accusing me? In front of my family." My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but deep down, I wasn't surprised either. Dinner that night felt like walking across thin ice. Every step fragile and ready to crack. My parents had set the table with their usual flair, as if appearances could cover the rot underneath. My dad peppered Michael with questions about his career, nodding in approval whenever the answers matched his unspoken standards. My mom hovered over Emily like always, making sure her plate was just right, while mine was almost an afterthought. It was the same routine I'd grown up with, and I had hoped, naively, that maybe this time things would be different. But Emily was relentless. From the moment we sat down, she leaned in just a little too close whenever Michael spoke, tilting her head like every word out of his mouth was profound. She laughed loud, fake, and exaggerated, at things that weren't even jokes. Twice she found some excuse to brush her hand against his arm, the move so subtle that my parents could pretend not to notice, but obvious enough that I knew exactly what she was doing. Michael noticed too. I could feel it in the way his fingers curled around mine under the table, grounding me, silently saying, "I see this and I'm not falling for it." He kept glancing at me, almost checking in, making sure I understood he was uncomfortable. That's what gave me strength to hold myself together, even though anger was bubbling in my chest. The breaking point came when Emily leaned halfway across the table to reach for the salad bowl, her arm brushing against Michael's shoulder, again, too deliberately to be an accident. That's when Michael finally snapped. He straightened in his chair and said firmly, his voice calm but edged, "Emily, could you not? That's not appropriate." The air went thick. My mom froze, her fork suspended in midair, eyes darting between them. My dad frowned, looking more annoyed at the disruption than at Emily's behavior. And Emily, oh Emily, she pulled back slowly, her eyes widening like she had just been slapped. For a second, I saw her mask crack, the fury in her expression. But just as quickly, she shifted gears, putting on that sugary, wounded look she'd perfected since childhood. "Wow," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. "So that's your game? You've been flirting with me all night and now you're accusing me? In front of my family?" My heart dropped into my stomach. It was such a bold, disgusting twist of the truth, but the worst part was, I knew exactly how this would play out. Emily was the golden child. She didn't even need to convince them. I could already see my parents bristling in her defense. And for the first time that night, I was terrified. Not of losing Michael, but of what my family was about to do next. The silence after Emily's words was deafening. My mom set her fork down slowly, as if she needed a dramatic pause before the show she was about to put on. My dad leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his eyes narrowing at Michael like he'd just revealed himself to be some kind of predator. "Excuse me?" Michael asked, his brows knitting together. His voice wasn't angry, it was steady, controlled, but I could hear the disbelief underneath. Emily leaned into the performance like she had rehearsed it. Her voice shook ever so slightly, just enough to sound fragile. And she wouldn't even look at Michael. "You've been making comments all night," she said, her eyes glistening as if tears were just waiting to spill. "The way you looked at me, the little jokes. And now you're trying to make me out to be the bad one? I don't know how my sister can even trust you." I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. She was spinning this so quickly, so effortlessly, that if I hadn't grown up with her, I might have believed it myself. My mom gasped and immediately reached for Emily's hand across the table, her voice full of outrage. "How dare you?" she snapped at Michael. "In our house. With our daughter." She didn't even glance at me. My dad shook his head, giving Michael that disappointed look he used on me whenever I failed to live up to Emily's shadow. "I should have known," he muttered. "Too good to be true. Men like you always slip eventually." Michael sat there, stunned but not silent. "That's not what happened," he said, firm but calm. "Your daughter has been coming on to me all evening. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to cause a scene, but I drew a line, and now she's trying to turn it on me." The room erupted. My mom practically shouted, insisting Emily would never behave that way. My dad called Michael disrespectful. And Emily? She clung to my mother's hand, lowering her gaze, playing the innocent victim, her lips trembling just enough to sell the act. I sat frozen, watching it unfold. I wanted to scream, to defend Michael, to tell them I had seen everything with my own eyes, but the weight of years of conditioning pressed on my chest. I knew this script too well. No matter what I said, Emily would be the angel, and I would be the bitter, jealous sister. But this time something was different. Michael didn't waver. He didn't look ashamed or guilty. He turned to me, his eyes searching mine, silently asking if I believed him. And in that moment, I knew exactly where I stood. When Michael's eyes locked with mine, everything else in the room seemed to fade. The shouting, Emily's crocodile tears, my parents' outrage. For a split second, it was just the two of us. He didn't beg me to take his side. He didn't try to defend himself with desperate pleas. He just looked at me, steady and sure, silently asking if I trusted him. And I did. Without hesitation. I had spent my whole life watching Emily twist reality like a magician pulling silk scarves from her sleeve. I had been the scapegoat in her performances more times than I could count. Accused of breaking things I hadn't touched, blamed for tantrums she had thrown, guilt-tripped into giving up my own opportunities just so she could shine brighter. This was nothing new. The only difference was that now, her target wasn't me. It was the man I loved. I turned to my parents, my voice sharper than I think they'd ever heard from me. Stop. Just stop. I know exactly what happened tonight, and I know exactly what Emily is doing. She's lying. My mom's head snapped toward me, her face twisted in fury. How dare you accuse your sister of lying to protect this man? She's your blood, your family. He's nothing compared to that. My dad piled on, his voice booming. So blind, so desperate. You'd really throw your own sister under the bus for some man? I can't believe you. But I could see the truth written all over their faces. This wasn't about what they believed. It was about keeping Emily's image untarnished. The golden child couldn't be questioned, not even when the evidence was right in front of them. I pushed my chair back and stood. My knees were shaking, but my voice was steady. You don't have to believe me. But I know who Emily is. I've always known. And if you choose to keep covering for her, then you've made your choice. Just don't expect me to play along anymore. Michael rose beside me, placing a hand gently on my back, not to lead me out but to stand with me. For the first time, I wasn't alone in that house. I glanced at Emily one last time. She was smirking now, barely able to hide it behind her false tears. She thought she had won again. But deep inside me, something hardened. This was the last time she'd use me, or anyone I loved, as her pawn. And in that moment, I knew two things with absolute clarity. I would not forgive her, and I would not let her get away with this. Leaving that dinner table was like peeling off a skin I'd been trapped inside my entire life. The shouting didn't stop as Michael and I walked to the door. My mother crying out about betrayal, my father calling me ungrateful, Emily's little fake sobs filling the spaces in between. But I didn't turn back. I couldn't. The night air hit me like a shock when we stepped outside. For the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling like someone was pressing their thumb against my chest. Michael opened the car door for me, but before I got in, I stood there staring at that house. The lights glowing in the windows had once meant safety, belonging. Now they looked like the bars of a prison I'd finally broken free from. In the days that followed, the phone calls started. First from my mom, her voice sharp and scolding. You owe your sister an apology. You embarrassed her in front of us and your fiancé. Don't think she'll ever forgive you if you keep this up. Then from my dad, colder. You've chosen a man over your family. Don't come crawling back when it blows up in your face. Not once did they ask how I felt. Not once did they even consider that Emily might have crossed a line. Their golden child was untouchable, and I was disposable. At first, I tried to reason with them. I explained what had happened, told them how Emily had behaved, but it was like shouting into a void. Every word bounced back at me, twisted into some accusation. Jealousy, bitterness, selfishness. It became clear they weren't interested in truth. They only cared about protecting Emily's pedestal. So I made my choice. I blocked their numbers. I stopped showing up for family dinners. I let birthdays and holidays pass without so much as a message. It wasn't easy. Cutting ties with people you once thought you couldn't live without never is. But with each day of silence, I felt lighter, stronger. Michael stood by me through it all, never once questioning my decision. He knew it wasn't just about him. It was about finally breaking free from a toxic cycle that had defined my whole life. And while my family closed ranks around Emily, shielding her from any accountability, I started planning something they would never see coming. Because if they thought they could paint me as the villain and live happily ever after, they had no idea who they were dealing with now. The silence after cutting ties was both a relief and a wound. On one hand, I no longer had to endure the constant gaslighting, the comparisons, the suffocating favoritism that had plagued me since childhood. On the other hand, there were moments, late at night, lying awake next to Michael, when the reality of it all hit me. I had lost my family. Or maybe, I thought bitterly, I had never really had them in the first place. At first, grief came in waves. I cried for the years wasted trying to earn love I was never going to get. I raged at myself for believing, even for a second, that things might be different once I was an adult. And I mourned the relationship I never had with my sister. The one where we could have been allies instead of rivals in a twisted game. She always had to win. Michael was my anchor through all of it. He would sit with me in silence when I needed to cry, remind me gently of all the ways Emily had manipulated me, and reassure me that walking away had been the bravest thing I could have done. Slowly, the grief turned into something sharper, something cleaner. Anger. I couldn't stop replaying that night at the dinner table, Emily's smug smirk peeking through her fake tears. The way my parents defended her without hesitation. They hadn't just chosen her over me. They had humiliated me, disrespected Michael, and tried to gaslight us both into doubting reality. That anger, once it settled, became fuel. That's when the idea of revenge began to take root. I wasn't interested in screaming matches or trying to convince them anymore. What I wanted was something quieter, colder. A reckoning that would make Emily and my parents feel the consequences of their blind favoritism. Not just for a moment, but for the rest of their lives. I didn't want to destroy them outright. No, that would be too easy, too obvious. I wanted them to trip on their own arrogance, to fall into holes they had dug themselves while believing they were untouchable. All I had to do was wait for the right opportunity, and be ready to push when the time came. For the first time, I wasn't the powerless older sister in Emily's shadow. I was the one holding the match. And they had no idea the fire was already burning. I didn't have to wait long for Emily to hand me the perfect opening, because that's the thing about golden children. When they're used to being shielded from consequences their whole lives, they grow careless. A few months after the disastrous dinner, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Emily had landed a job at a boutique marketing firm. On paper, it sounded impressive, but I knew better. Emily wasn't the hard-working type. She was the type to charm, flirt, and scheme her way into things she hadn't earned. I didn't care much at first. Let her play office princess if she wanted. But then I saw the announcement on social media. My parents had practically thrown a party for her achievement, gushing about how proud they were. My mom even posted, "We always knew Emily was destined for greatness." My name, of course, was nowhere to be seen, despite the fact that by then, I was in a stable career, planning my wedding, and had actually built something for myself without their help. That was when the anger sharpened into clarity. Emily was climbing, but she was climbing on a shaky ladder. I knew her habits too well. Cutting corners, using people, making promises she couldn't keep. And I also knew how that industry worked. Reputation was everything. One whisper in the right ear could tilt the balance. I didn't plan anything rash. Instead, I started watching. I kept an eye on her company's projects, the events she bragged about attending, the people she tagged in photos. Quietly, carefully, I pieced together a picture of her professional world. And sure enough, cracks started to show. Clients she didn't follow up with. Deadlines she missed. A reputation for being distracted at work. Something Michael confirmed when one of his colleagues casually mentioned meeting my sister at an event and describing her as a little too flirty, not very professional. The more I learned, the more I realized that Emily wasn't building a career. She was building a house of cards. And I had the power to send the whole thing tumbling down. The opportunity presented itself when I overheard that she had been put in charge of pitching to a major client. Something way over her head. I knew exactly how this would go. She'd bluff her way through, then scramble to cover the fallout. Unless, of course, someone gave that client a nudge to look a little closer at her track record. And that's when my revenge plan truly began to take shape. I didn't act rashly. This wasn't about yelling or confrontation. It was about precision, patience, and letting Emily's own behavior be her undoing. I started quietly reaching out to people who had worked with her in the past, former clients and colleagues who had grown frustrated with her charm over substance approach. I asked subtle questions, nothing that directly implicated me, but enough to remind them of patterns they already knew. Missed deadlines, forgotten promises, half-finished projects. At first, I hesitated. I thought about my parents and how furious they would be if they ever found out I'd done this. But then I remembered that they had already chosen her over me, defended her lies, and tried to ruin Michael's reputation in our own family. My guilt evaporated like smoke. If Emily fell because of her own recklessness and my careful guidance, it was justice, not cruelty. The first little victory came in the form of a client email accidentally forwarded to me. Emily had bragged on social media about landing a huge pitch, but in reality, she hadn't done her homework. Her team was frustrated, her notes were sloppy, and she had barely prepared. I sent a discreet tip to the client, an anonymous note pointing out inconsistencies in her presentation materials, and offering an outside perspective. It was subtle, harmless seeming, but it planted a seed of doubt. A seed that grew quickly. The client started double-checking details, asking pointed questions, and soon Emily found herself flustered, trying to cover her mistakes while pretending nothing was wrong. She looked flawless on the outside, but everyone around her started noticing cracks. Meanwhile, I maintained my distance. Michael and I kept building our life together, engaged in our world, while Emily's carefully crafted image began to crumble behind the scenes. My parents, blissfully unaware, continued to gush over her supposed achievements, never suspecting that I was the quiet storm shaking the foundation beneath them. It was intoxicating, not the thrill of revenge itself, but the satisfaction of seeing justice take its natural course. Emily's charm and manipulations, things that had tormented me for years, were finally catching up to her. And no one could blame me. I had simply refused to intervene while reality did its work. It didn't take long for Emily's first real cracks to become visible. The client she had so confidently pitched to started asking detailed questions she couldn't answer. Her team, already frustrated with her lack of preparation, quietly complained to management, pointing out missed deadlines and incomplete reports. Emily tried to smile through it, laughing off mistakes as miscommunications, but the energy around her shifted. The charm that had carried her so far suddenly looked like arrogance. Then came the email that made it impossible to ignore. A client directly questioned her credibility, asking for verification on points she had presented as fact. I didn't send it, but I knew exactly how it would land, because I had seen her work style firsthand in past years. She panicked, stumbled through excuses, and in that panic, her golden facade began to crumble. Meanwhile, my parents continued to post on social media, celebrating her supposed success. Each post became almost tragicomic, a perfect contrast to the growing reality that her career wasn't as flawless as they believed. They didn't realize that their protection of Emily only magnified the fallout. They were building the stage for her humiliation. I kept myself at a distance, only checking in discreetly to watch the dominoes fall. My anger from that dinner table, the betrayal, the gaslighting, it had all transformed into something cold and strategic. I wasn't shouting or confronting Emily. I was letting her choices and the enablers around her do the work for me. It was strangely satisfying to see her scramble, all while keeping my hands clean. The once invincible golden child, the sister who had tormented me for decades, was now vulnerable, exposed, and for the first time, completely accountable for her own actions. And as I watched, I realized something important. I didn't need to fight her openly to win. I only needed to stop being her pawn and let reality take its course. The ripple effect didn't stop with Emily. My parents, who had spent decades shielding her from consequences, were about to feel the impact as well. They had always built her up as flawless, untouchable, the perfect daughter, whose every action was excused. But now, the cracks in Emily's carefully constructed image were widening, and everyone could see them. Word of Emily's mishandled projects began to spread quietly through her professional circles. Clients asked pointed questions, vendors were hesitant, and colleagues started whispering about her lack of reliability. Eventually, someone connected the dots, and Emily's credibility started to take a serious hit. She was stressed, defensive, and increasingly desperate to regain control. My parents tried to intervene, as they always had. They called me frantically, though I hadn't spoken to them in months. My mom's voice trembled with worry, but it was laced with indignation. "This is all wrong. She's our daughter. You're letting these rumors ruin her career." My dad echoed her frustration, lecturing me about family loyalty and responsibility. I listened quietly, letting them tire themselves out. Then I said what I had wanted to for years. "She's your daughter, yes. But she's also responsible for her own actions. I'm done defending someone who's spent my whole life undermining me. This is on her, and on you for never teaching her accountability." There was silence on the line, the kind of stunned, speechless pause that comes when someone realizes they've lost control. I hung up, feeling lighter than I had in years. My parents couldn't scapegoat me anymore. They couldn't rewrite history. They had chosen to stand by Emily at every turn, and now they were watching the consequences unfold, powerless to stop them. It wasn't vindictive, it was justice. Years of favoritism and manipulation were finally catching up with them, and they had no one to blame but themselves. For the first time, I saw the power of standing firm, of refusing to be the family's punching bag, and it felt liberating. The momentum was unstoppable. Emily's missteps had started small, but once clients and colleagues noticed the pattern, it snowballed. Projects she promised to complete were late, presentations were sloppy, and her tendency to charm her way out of problems no longer worked. People were tired of the excuses. The same charm that had given her power over our family now backfired spectacularly in her professional life. The whispers grew louder, and soon it wasn't just her colleagues noticing. Key clients started pulling contracts, questioning her ability to deliver, and management began reviewing her performance in ways that would have been unthinkable months before. Emily was frantic, sending frantic emails, calling old contacts, trying to smooth things over, but every attempt seemed to backfire. Her confidence faltered, her smiles became tight, and that smugness she had worn like armor finally slipped. Meanwhile, my parents were powerless. Their posts on social media praising her brilliance now looked ironic and hollow. Friends and family who followed her updates began noticing discrepancies, sending cautious messages of concern. Some even pointing out that she might not be as competent as she had claimed. My parents tried to defend her, but the cracks were too deep, too public. The golden child image they had nurtured for years was unraveling before their eyes. I watched it all unfold quietly, alongside Michael, who never once questioned the path I chose. There was no gloating in my heart, only the satisfaction of truth revealing itself. Emily had spent a lifetime thinking she could manipulate and bend reality to her will, but in the end, reality didn't bend. It broke her carefully constructed world, and my family's illusions along with it. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the powerless older sister, overlooked and silenced. I was free, and Emily, the one who had tormented me for decades, was finally facing the consequences she had long avoided. It didn't take long for my parents to realize that Emily's golden child image had been shattered. Calls and emails from her colleagues and clients reached them, and unlike before, there was no way to cover it up or spin it in her favor. The once confident, untouchable Emily had become anxious, defensive, and visibly shaken, and my parents were forced to face it. I didn't hear from them immediately. Instead, I watched from a distance as the fallout reached my family circle. Relatives who had always fawned over Emily began asking pointed questions. Social media posts that used to paint her as perfect were now quietly deleted or edited, as if erasing the past could fix the present. My parents were furious. Not with Emily, but with the world that was exposing her flaws, and eventually, they came to me, their voices tinged with desperation. "We don't know what to do," my mom admitted, her tone unusually subdued. "Everything seems to be falling apart for her, and maybe we were too hard on you." My father was more blunt. "We never realized how far you had to go to protect yourself. We thought we were helping, but we let her walk all over you." And now he trailed off, shaking his head. I listened, letting them stumble through their explanations, their half apologies. There was no satisfaction in gloating. This wasn't about winning, it was about truth being undeniable. I told them calmly, "I've been telling you who she was my entire life. You just refused to listen. Now you're seeing it, but I've already moved on." They were speechless, caught between regret and denial, and I realized something. It wasn't my job to fix their perspective. They had made their choices long ago, and I had made mine. My life, my happiness, and my future were not theirs to control anymore. For the first time, I truly felt free from the weight of their favoritism. The consequences they had shielded Emily from were finally catching up, not just to her, but to themselves as enablers of her toxic behavior. By the time Emily realized her professional world was crumbling, it was too late to regain control. The client she had overpromised to had pulled out entirely, citing missed deadlines and lack of accountability. Her colleagues, exhausted from covering for her mistakes, openly questioned her reliability. Even former friends who once adored her charm began to distance themselves, tired of her manipulations and constant need for attention. My parents were left reeling, watching the golden child they had built their lives around crumble. The social media posts praising her were now awkwardly deleted or quietly hidden, as if erasing them could undo months of visible failure. The image of perfection they had so carefully cultivated had collapsed, leaving only the reality they had ignored for decades. Meanwhile, Michael and I were living our lives quietly happy, stronger for having endured the storm together. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't celebrating Emily's downfall. But there was a deep sense of peace in knowing that justice had been served in its own way. Years of manipulation, favoritism, and control had finally met natural consequences, and I no longer had to be a witness, or a victim, of their toxic family dynamic. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. Free to love, to plan a future, and to live without the shadows of my sister's entitlement and my parents' blind loyalty looming over me. I had learned to trust my instincts, to believe in the people who truly mattered, and most importantly, to stand firm in my own truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made others. The golden child was broken, my parents humbled, and I finally whole. Looking back now, I can see the full scope of what happened. Emily was never just a sister. She was a lifelong lesson in manipulation, entitlement, and the consequences of unchecked favoritism. My parents' unwavering defense of her taught me how far people will go to protect an image, even at the expense of truth and fairness. And Michael, he showed me what it meant to be seen, truly seen, and supported without conditions. The most important lesson I learned is that you don't have to accept being treated as less than. Family bonds can be sacred, but they can also be toxic. There comes a point where standing up for yourself isn't just healthy, it's necessary. I refused to let Emily's manipulations define my life, and I refused to let my parents' blind favoritism dictate my happiness. For anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, my advice is simple. Trust your instincts, believe those who show consistent honesty and care, and set boundaries that protect your well-being. Revenge doesn't have to be cruel or overt. It can be the quiet act of refusing to participate in a cycle of abuse, letting reality and accountability take their course. In the end, I didn't just reclaim my life from my sister. I reclaimed it from years of being silenced, overlooked, and manipulated. And that freedom, that was the sweetest victory of all.